Clarification regarding praying salah on a chair and indicating sujood. Okay, number one, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mufti wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. I hope you're well. I am very well. Jazakumullah khairan. I would like to seek clarification regarding the correct method of performing salah while seated on a chair due to illness or physical difficulty. There are many posts and infographics circulating which show different methods of indicating ruku and sujood while seated. Some show a slight forward bend of the upper body stroke back for ruku and a deeper bend for sujood. Others show placing the head forward more prominently. There also appears to be variation regarding whether one may place something in front to lower the head onto. See pic for context. Arrow pointing down. Could you kindly clarify what is the correct Shari'i method of performing ruku and sujood while praying on a chair? How much should one bend for ruku compared to sujood? Should we use just head or kneel forward with upper body? In this the same for praying on airplanes? Is this the same for praying on airplanes? Is it permissible to place a table, cushion, or object in front in order to lower the head onto for sujood? If a person is able to stand but unable to perform full sujood on the ground, what is the correct sequence they should follow? Given the confusion from various diagrams and posts, I would greatly appreciate a clear explanation so that the prayer may be performed correctly according to the sunnah. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Barakallah fiqh. So first I'll start from the bottom up, so to speak, where the questioner says, I would greatly appreciate a clear explanation so that the prayer may be performed correctly according to the sunnah. That's the key point. As far as I know, the Prophet ﷺ never prayed on a chair. The Prophet ﷺ prayed on the floor. So in circumstances where a person cannot make ruku or sujood or stand or whatever he can't do, then he should pray seated on the ground. That is the sunnah method. So when the Prophet ﷺ injured himself, he injured his leg, then he prayed sat down. He did not pray sat on a chair or sat on an object, even though it was difficult for the followers to see, as in the Sahaba. So he had Sayyidina Abu Bakr next to him, who would imitate his actions, and the people would follow Sayyidina Abu Bakr's actions because they could not see the Prophet ﷺ. So therefore, if we're going to say the sunnah, then the sunnah methodology is to stay on the ground. That is the sunnah. Like I said, I wanted to start from the bottom up. What we're seeing nowadays is a very strange occurrence which is happening in our masajids, and that is this mass number of chairs. I'm middle-aged. I'm not going to say I'm old. I'm middle-aged, and I've been around a bit. So I've been around for a while, and I've seen over the decades that the number of chairs in the masjid is increasing. Now I scratch my head because I think, well, what's going on? What are the possibilities? One of the possibilities is that we're becoming weaker, and for some reason we can't pray sitting down. I don't see anybody pray sitting down, apart from the nafil, and we'll get to that. I don't see anybody seated on the ground praying. Everybody I see seated are seated on chairs. So I don't think this is because of some physical problem, because I see those very same people walk out of the masjid. They're not on wheelchairs. They walk out of the masjid, so they can't walk. So I don't know what the issue is, what they can't do. Can they not make ruku? Can they not? And some of them I've seen get in a car and drive off. So they clearly have power to press clutches and brakes and be behind a powerful machine and control it and be able to turn their body and everything. So it puzzles me why people are sat on chairs. It does puzzle me, genuinely. It puzzles me. I don't think that there are more injured people now than there were 40 years ago or 50 years ago. I will not buy that. If you'd been in a masjid 50 years ago, 40 years ago, you would have hardly seen any chairs. In fact, I don't believe you would have seen any. I can't recall seeing them back in the day when I was a kid. There just weren't chairs there. I think this has become a habit of people. It's a comfortable thing to do because people, who especially people who are slightly overweight as well, standing is problematic, and even sitting in tashahhud is problematic because your body weight is on your legs, and your legs is taking all your body weight, and if you're slightly overweight, that can be quite painful. So I believe this is a choice. This is not a pandemic of illnesses which is spread across the UK or anywhere else for that matter, where people are now struggling to be able to sit down on the ground, because that is the sunnah. So that's my first point. Okay, my first point is, I think we're just going too quick for the chairs, and I see masajids offering chairs as though they're helping somebody. You know, what will our masjid look like 100 years from now? Will anybody stand for salah? Will anybody make ruku? Will anybody make sujood? Because when people are sat on chairs, they don't make ruku, they don't make sujood. They do everything sat on a chair. Right? So that's a big danger, isn't it? Because ruku is fard, sujood is fard, qiyam is fard. And these people are missing 3 faraid. Now, if you're sat on a chair, when you can perform these faraid, your salah is invalid. Your salah is invalid. And I have a feeling that people think the fact that these chairs are there, that this is, a permissible way of performing salah. It is not. It is not a permissible way of performing salah. The sound way of performing salah is to sit down on the floor and perform your salah like that. Not to sit on a comfortable chair, but it's to sit on the floor. So I reiterate, there is a problem here, a big problem. Before I answer the question, there is a big problem here, and I think this will become more and more widespread, where unfortunately 50 years from now, we're not going to recognize it. And when we used to take great pride as Muslims, didn't we? We say, oh, subhanAllah, look at our masajids, and look at the churches, and look at the synagogues. They have pews in churches, and they don't even bow, and they don't even make ruku. What kind of worship is this? They just sit down and they read from a book. Really? How long before we have the mushafs in front of us and we read from the mushaf? We're already sitting on chairs. Soon chairs will become a permanent fixture in the masjid. So people will walk in like they are in synagogues, like they do in churches, and they will sit on chairs, on benches, because moving chairs will become a problem. So they'll think, well, let's just make it a permanent fixture. The next person who comes along with a bright idea says, why don't we just make it a permanent fixture? And then it will say, oh, it's too difficult for people to take their shoes on and off. And the only reason why we used to take our shoes on and off is because we used to prostrate on the carpet. Well, we're no longer prostrating on the carpet anymore. So therefore, we can keep our shoes on. So where will we be 100 years from now? How much have we moved in 50 years, as I've said to you? How much have we moved in 40 years? How much can we move in 100 years? How much can we move in 300 years? Don't forget, Islam, via the Prophet ﷺ, is 600 years younger than Christianity. So give us another 600 years, where will we be? So I think this is a big problem. I really wanted to emphasize that point. So that's number one. Secondly, is the style of chair that we have. Okay, the style of chair. I've seen, obviously, masajids that have like the normal 4-legged chair. The problem with the 4-legged chair, especially our carpets are very good quality, thick carpets. So when you got the 4-legged chair, then because the surface area is so small, it has indentations in the carpet. It damages the carpet, because if you've got a fairly bulky fella that weighs, I don't know, 15 stone, 14 stone, 13 stone or higher, sat on a chair with 4 little small legs, then think of it like high heels that women wear. You're putting a large a large weight, a large mass over a very small surface area. And what happens is you get indentation. So it's damaging carpets. So that's number one. Secondly, where should the chair go on the saf? Because that's another problem now, is when people are sat on the chair, their feet, some people then stand up. Okay, they stand up for a little bit, few minutes, and then sit back down on the chair. So when they stand up, their shoulders are not in line with the other muqtadis. They're like about, a yard ahead because of the chair. So when they stand up, they're way out of sync. And the Prophet ﷺ was very keen that he wanted to make sure all the chests were level. So if an archer was to fire an arrow, then it would literally miss everybody's chest exactly the same. No chest it would hit because somebody's chest was protruding. In this case now, you've got this bloke who sat like a yard ahead of everybody. Right? So that's a problem. So if he's going to be sat on a chair, then it is far better for the chair to be, I don't know, it's look, my hand looks a bit bent there in the camera. It's better for the chair to be straight backed rather than reclining. Because when the chair is straight backed, then at least the person's back is level, rather than the recline where the chair reclines slightly, so it's actually leaning back a little bit. Reason being is that when we have a person who is ill, Salatul Marid, when he is ill and he's sat on the floor, then he's permitted to have his feet ahead of him, in front of him. At that time, we use his back to be level with the back of the legs of the other men. We don't use his feet anymore. We only use his feet when he is stood up. So when a man is stood up, then we count his feet and we say he's, level with their ankles, level with their hips, level with the shoulders, level with the head, and the chest are all level. But when this person is sat down, then the Sharia permits his feet to be ahead, because where's he going to put his feet? It's better for his feet to be in tashahhud position. That is the most preferred position. But say Khuda na khasta, he's twisted an ankle and therefore he can't sit on his legs. So he has his legs out in front of him. So therefore the ulama say that now we use his back, and his back should be straight. So his back is now level with the chap next to him. So he just looks like a short bloke, okay, where his head reaches everybody else's hips. And he's like, so when he's sat down, his head is level with somebody's hip, but his back is level with their legs. So again, he is level. Okay, because we want order. It's just his feet are out in front. Okay, his feet are out in front. Now, there was a few other questions asked. So let me just bring some text that I want to share with you. So we have a key text, which is called Nur al-Idah. In Nur al-Idah, it mentions this. وَإِن تَعَزَّرَ الرُّكُوعُ. Where are my glasses? Okay. وَإِن تَعَزَّرَ الرُّكُوعُ وَالسُّجُودُ. They didn't help at all. All right. وَإِن تَعَزَّرَ الرُّكُوعُ وَالسُّجُودُ صَلَّى قَائِدًا بِالْإِيمَاءِ. If he is incapable of making ruku and he is incapable of making sujood, he should pray sat down. There is no point in standing up if you cannot do ruku or sujood. All right? He should pray sat down. And when we say sat down, we are talking about sitting on the floor. Okay? On the floor, because there was no sitting on chairs. Remember that. This sitting on chairs is a more recent innovation. You could argue it's a bid'ah. It's a more recent innovation. Ṣalāh qā'idan bil-īmā. And we're going to discuss what this bil-īmā means. Well, I'll tell you what it means. So I can't keep a secret, can I? So he will pray sat down with indication. We'll discuss what indication means. وَجَعَلَ إِيمَاءَهُ لِلسُّجُودِ أَخْفَضَ مِنْ إِيمَائِهِ لِلرُّكُوعِ. He will make his indication for sajda lower than his indication for ruku. فَإِن لَمْ يُخْفِضْهُ عَنْهُ لَا تَصِحُّ إِلَى آخِرَةٍ. If he does not differentiate by lowering for sajda his head, then he does for ruku, then this is not sound. وفي الشرح وإن تعذر الركوع والسجود وقدر على القعود ولو مستندا صلى قائدا بالإمام. If he is incapable, if ruku is impossible, if sajda is impossible, but he has the ability to sit, even if it means reclining against something, right, then he will pray sat down bil imam, by indication. للركوع والسجود برأسه. For both ruku and for sajda using his head. He's indicating with his head. وَلَا تُجْزِئُهُ مُتَّجِئًا كَمَا فِي الْجَوْهَرَةِ عَنِ النِّهَايَةِ. It's not permissible for him to pray lying down, like it mentions in the Kitab al-Jawhara, from which is citing the Kitab al-Nihaya. وَجَعَلَ إِيمَاءَهُ بِرَأْسِهِ. And he will make his indication with his head. لِلسُّجُودِ. For sajda أَخْفَضَ مِنْ إِيمَائِهِ. Lower than his indication برأسه للركوع, with his head for ruku. The key thing to bear in mind here is the indication is only with his head. Okay. The difference though is by using his head, the ruku is to one level. For Sujūd, I've just yanked my amama, right? So he's there sat straight. When he's going into ruku, it's there. When he's going into Sujūd, it's there. There is no movement of the back. There's just movement of the head. Stand is his normal position for qiyam, ruku. So literally, he's praying with his head. Because this only reason he prays with his body is when he's able, and he only prays with his body in order to go into bowing and prostration. With his body unavailable, bowing and prostration has been removed from him. And as bowing and prostration has been removed from him, he needs to do something to replace the bowing and prostration. His sitting is replacing his standing, because the only reason we stand is so that we can prostrate. There is no need to stand otherwise. Right? Let's carry on. وكذا لو عجز عن السجود وقدر على الركوع يومئ بهما كما في البحر عن البداع. Similarly, if he is incapable of prostrating, but he is capable of making ruku, he will still indicate for both of them. Listen to that again. If he is incapable of making sajda, but he is capable of bowing, of making ruku, he will indicate, and when we say indicate biras, for both of them, as is mentioned in Bahar, and that is citing al-Badai. وَحَقِيقَةُ الْإِمَا تَعْتَعُ رَأْسٍ, and the reality or the definition of ima is the movement of the head or the lowering of the head. Ta'ta is to lower the head. وَرُوِيَ مُجَرَّدُ تَحْرِيكِهَا, and it has been narrated just only the movement of it, meaning no movement of anything else, only مُجَرَّدُ تَحْرِيكِهَا, only the movement of it. لِمَا قَالَ فِي الْبَحْرِ, like is mentioned in Bahar, وَالشَّرْحِ الْمَقْتِسِ عن الخانية مريض عجز عن الإيماء فحرك رأسه. So this again is cited some key Hanafi texts, and then he says an ill person is incapable عن الإيماء فحرك برأسه, then he will move his head. And Abi Hanifa يجوز, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, this is permissible. وقال ابن فضل, according to Ibn Fadl, لا يجوز لأنه لم يوجد منه الفعل. Obviously, that's that position, but we leave that. Ibn Fadl says it will not permit him لأنه لم يوجد منه الفعل, because we're seeing no action from him. انتهى, meaning end of the topic. فحقيقة الإيماء تعتع الرأس انتهت عبارتهما. The reality or the definition of ima is the lowering of the head. Solely the lowering of the head. Intahat ibaratuhuma. That's where the citation from both those texts ends. فإن لم يخفضه أي الإيماء للسجود عنه أي الإيماء للركوع بأن جعلهما على حد سواء لا تصح كما في شرح المقدسي والبحر عن الوالوالجية لفقد السجود حقيقة وحكما مع القدرة. If he does not lower, meaning to indicate for sajda compared to indicating for ruku, in that he makes both of them exactly the same. So he makes his ruku there and he keeps his head there for sajda. Then in that case, it mentioned in the Sharh al-Maqdisi wal-Bahar and al-Falwalajina that he has missed sajda in reality. That's how we consider it, that he's missed his sajda, and the hukman is based upon the ability he has. Furthermore, let's carry on. In Tanwir al-Absar, which is the sharh of Tumurtashi's kitab, which eventually Ibn Abidin rahimullah did a hashia on Tanwir al-Absar. Okay, Tanwir al-Absar is by Imam Haskafi. وَإِن تَعَذَّرَ أي الرُّكُوع وَالسُّجُودِ, if he is incapable of, if there's an incapacity for bowing or prostrating, أو مَعَ قَائِدًا, he will indicate sat down. وَيَجْعَلُ سُجُودَهُ أَخْفَضَ مِنْ رُكُوعِهِ, and he will lower his sajda than his ruku till the end. وفي الدر المختار, okay, which is Imam, the text that carries on, the hashia that's written on there, ليس تعذرهما شرطا. The incapacity is not a condition of both of them. Rather, بل تعذر سجود كافٍ. Rather, if he's not able to do sajda, that is enough. The ruku is secondary, meaning if he can do ruku but he can't do sajda, then he will do قائدا بالإيماء. وهو أي الإيماء قائدا أفضل من الإيماء قائما لقربه من الأرض إلى آخره. Then rather than trying to make ruku and then sitting back down again for sajda, he should stay sat down, and that is afzal for him than indicating standing because of his closeness to the earth. Because when he sat down, he is closer to the earth, and sajda is closer to the earth because you make sajda on the earth. So there's no point him making standing up and doing that. وقال ابن عابدين رحمه الله قوله أومأ قائدا. So he will indicate sitting. I think I might have got my names mixed up there. Tanwir al-Absar is by Imam Tumurtashi, and Ad-Dur al-Mukhtar is by Imam Haskafi, and then Ar-Radd al-Muhtar is by Imam Ibn Abidin. So apologies if I said it the other way around. Anyway, قوله أومأ قائدا, he will indicate sat down لأن ركنية القيام للتوصل إلى السجود. He says he will indicate sat down. Why? Why not stand up to make ruku? Why is he still sat down, even though he's capable of making ruku, but he only has a problem making sajda? So Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah says, because the necessity of standing is in order to reach to sajda. We start by standing in salah is so we can reach sajda. We want to drop down on our face. And when you drop down, the only way you can drop down is when you start from a high point. And the only way you're going to start from a high point is when you're stood up. Okay, that's why the standing is there. So if you cannot make sajda, then there's no point to stand. Because the whole point of qiyam in salah is, as I said, so that you fall down on your face. But if you can't fall down on your face, then there's no point in standing. قوله ويجعل سجوده أخفض إلى آخره. He will make his sajda lower till the end. أشار إلى أنه يكفيه أدنى الانحناء عن الركوع, meaning it will suffice him the slight movement for ruku. وأنه لا يلزمه تقريب جبهته من الأرض بأقصى ما يمكنه كما بسطه في البحر عن الزاهدية. Let's see what else it goes on. Furthermore, this is some more ibarat from Rad. وفي الشامي يعني إمام ابن عابدين's text. وفي الزخيرة رجل بحلقه خراج إن سجد سالة وهو قاعد على الركوع والقيام والقراءة يصلي قائدا. So there is a person, okay, so he's got some illness, okay, when he goes into sajda, he pushes on his bladder, and as he pushes on his bladder, urine leaves his body. Okay, so he's absolutely fine. He can't go into sajda. If he stands, it's all good. Okay, he can وهو قادر على ركوع, he can perform ruku. وعلى القيام, he can make qiyam. He can والقراءة, he can stand and make qiraءة. He can do all of those things. The only problem is when he goes into sajda, his thigh, even though he keeps his thigh away from his body, he pushes against his bladder, which causes urine to leave his organ, which breaks his wudu. Okay, breaks his wudu. So every time he's making sajda, is breaking his wudu. He's never completing his salah. So he speaks to a mufti. A mufti says to him, you pray sat down, brother. Okay, you pray sat down. Whilst he is able, qadirun ala ruku wal qiyam wal qira, yusalli qa'idan yumi. He will play sat down by indication. وَلَوْ صَلَّى قَائِمًا بِالرُّكُوعِ وَقَعَدَ وَأَوْمَى بِالسُّجُودِ أَجْزَأُهُ. If, however, he still went and stood up and he made ruku, and then he sat down, and then he indicated with his head for sajda, it would suffice. Yani ajza'ahu. However, wal-awwalu afdal, the first is the more preferred opinion. The preferred opinion meaning that even if you're capable of making ruku, even if you're capable of standing, it is better to stay seated and indicate with your head. لأن القيام والركوع لم يشرعا قربة بأنفسهما. The reason being is standing in salah and bowing in salah have not been legislated as a means to draw close to Allah in of themselves. بل ليكونا وسيلتين إلى السجود. Rather, the purpose is for them is as a means to reach sajda. Sajda is the key. Okay, sajda is the key. That's why we have sajda at the end of each rak'ah. That is the goal of this rak'ah. The goal of the rak'ah is to make sajda. Furthermore, let's see if we can add to it. وفي الدور المختار وهو أي الإيماء قائدا أفضل من الإيماء قائما لقربه من الأرض. We've already mentioned that. Imam Shami says لقربه من الأرض أي فيكون أشبه بالسجود منها. Why? Because it's better staying seated. Because being seated is the close you can get to sajda. Now think of a person sat on a chair. How close is he to sajda? He's about halfway. Okay. Whereas a person sat on the floor performing salah is close to sajda. The only difference is his backside might be on the ground, his back of his thighs might be on the ground, his knees are not on the ground, but it might be that the back of his knees are on the ground. So the only thing which is missing is his knees are missing, and his hands are missing, and his face is missing on the ground. But some parts of his body is on the ground. But if you're sat elevated on a chair, on a throne, then how are you close to sajda? وفي دور المختار من تعذر عليه القيام صلى قائدا كيف شاء على المذهب لأن مرض أسقط عنه أركان فالهيئات أولى وقال الزفر كالمتشهد كيل وبه يفتى. He should sit in the position of a person who is doing tashahud. Okay, a person is mutashahud, yani a person who's performing tashahud. That is the preferred position to sit. If for whatever reason that causes him pain, that he cannot sit in tashahud, it hurts him, then he may shift his legs to one side, okay, a bit like where a woman sits, and then he can place his posterior on the ground, okay, and he can have his legs to one side. If he struggles with that, then he can make it sit like like with the way we sit cross-legged. He can sit cross-legged if that is required. But the preferred position is for him to sit in a tashahud position. You can't sit in a tashahud position sat on a chair. وقال ابن عابدين قوله كيف شاء meaning كيف تيسر له, like I just mentioned now, if he can't sit in tashahud. لو بغير ضرر من تربع أو غيره, meaning without causing himself harm, even if he sits cross-legged or something else. قوله على المذهب جزم به في الغرر والنور الإيضاح والصححه في البدائع والشرح المجمع واختاره في البحر والنهر. So he just quotes many books that have selected this opinion. فالهيئات أولى جمع هيئة وهي هنا كيفية القعود. قال تحاوي وفيه أن الأركان إنما سقطت لتعسرها ولا كذلك الهيئات تعمل. قوله كلا وبه يفتى. قال في التجنيس والخلاصة والوالجية لأنه أيسر على المريض. It's easy for the sick person. قال في البحر ولا يخفى ما فيه بل أيسر عدم التقييد بكيفية من الكيفيات. It is easier to not qualify this by a mannerism, rather to say that he can sit in any way, shape or form. وذكر قبله أن في حالة التشهد يجلس كما يجلس للتشهد بالإجماع. That's how we should sit. And when you sit in tashahud, your hands are placed on your thighs. They're not placed on your stomach. Your hands are only placed below your navel is when you're stood up. You're not stood up. You're sat on the ground. You're sat on a chair. So why would your hands be tied beneath your navel when you're sat on a chair? That's when you're in qiyam. You can't do qiyam. So you've now been excused from qiyam, so you will always just sit in the tashahud position. And the only difference you're doing here is the ruku and sajda with the head. That's it. There is no other hand movement or anything else like that at all. Right? Obviously, you make takbir tahrima, and that's it now. You just sit. قولوا ينبغي أن يقال إن كان الجلوس كما يجلس للتشهد أيسر عليه من غيره أو مساويا لغيره كان أولى. So what he's saying here is that the sitting, what we refer to here, is that if the sitting of tashahud is easier for him than another position, or it is the same than another position, then that is a preferred one. وإلا اختار الأيسر من في جميع الحالات. Then he should just pick the one most comfortable. ولعل ذلك محمل القولين والله أعلم. And that brings that topic to the end. Let me see if there's anything else to add here. قولوا ولا كذلك الهيئات قد يقال سقطت تبعا للأركان لتبية حالها وإن لم يوجد لها مسقط. قولوا ولا اختار الأيسر. No, it's just giving more details to that. And that, I believe, I have covered everything I need to cover on that point. Okay, so we've talked about the movements. We've talked about how they should pray Salah. I've told you about the chairs. Similarly, what the chairs should be is the chairs are preferred to be in a separate section. I think for the big masjids, they should have a separate section for people praying on chairs. A separate section. So that at least the safs are right. In some of the masjids I've been to, somebody just props a chair in the middle of a saf. Just props a chair in the middle of a saf. So, you know, and no one's going to stand that close to a chair. So it's going crazy. There should be a big masjids should have a separate section for chair people. Like I said, they shouldn't be. People shouldn't be on chairs. That's the first point. But now, you know, as I say, the cat is already out of the bag. How are you going to put the genie back in the bottle? So I used mixed metaphors there, didn't I? Cat out of the bag and genie out of the bottle. You can't put the genie back in the bottle now. Pandora's box is open. You know, to educate people now is going to be challenging. Okay. I think I've covered everything. I don't think there's anything there that I feel. There is one other point that I wanted to raise whilst I have your attention. Let me find where I wanted to share that. Oops. I was about to say oopsie daisy. Right. This is about nafil prayer. Okay, you see many people pray nafil prayer. Now forget about the chair. You see many people praying nafil prayer sat down. And they'll also be making ruku and sajda they'll do to the ground, but they'll make ruku sat down. All right, so you'll see them. They'll start the nafil. This is usually after the witr salah. They'll do the 2 rakats nafil, Allahu Akbar. They'll stay seated. They'll tie their hands around below their navel, even though they sat down, which they should be placing on their hands now. And then when they're making ruku, they'll bend their back. Okay. And then when they're making sajda, they'll make sajda on the ground. Right? That is not the correct way to pray nafil. But I forgot one thing. Let me just finish off that other thing. So this is again Radd al-Muhtar. So he mentions here, أقول الحق التفصيل وهو أنه إن كان ركوعهم بمجرد إيماء الرأس. Just to again re-emphasize the point that there is no back movement. Because I've seen some of the infographics and they move the back. You cannot move the back. So he says here, أقول الحق التفصيل وهو أنه إن كان ركوعه بمجرد إيماء الرأس. من غير انحناء وميل الظهر. He says this is solely by the moving of the head without moving the back. This is what we call ima, not ruku, because you are not doing ruku. In ruku, you move your back, but you're not doing ruku. You are substituting, because ruku you cannot do from a seated position. Ruku you can only do from a standing position, because you go from a standing position to a bowing position. That's how you do ruku. How can you go into ruku from a seated position? You're sat down. Ruku means stood up and going from 180 degrees to 90 degrees. So, and it is permissible, like for a woman, we tell a woman not to go to full, 90 degrees, because we don't have like sharp angles for a woman in her prayer. We say as long as you can touch your knees, sister, and even if that means that her back, her back is only slightly bent. That's exactly how men pray on a chair. How a woman slightly bends her back when she's praying, making ruku. Now, so ruku, remember, let me re-emphasize, ruku can only be ruku can only be done when you are stood up. You cannot do ruku sat down. There's no such thing as ruku when you are sat down. You lose that. You lose ruku. So what you have to do is you substitute ruku with the ima bi ras, with the indication with your head. As soon as the back comes in, that is ruku, and ruku cannot be done in a seated position. Okay, I wanted to mention that last point. All right. فلا يعتبر السجود بعد إلا إيماء مطلقا وإن كان مع الانحناء كان ركوع معتبرا. Because if you make inhina, if you get your back involved, now you are performing ruku, and you are substituted the ruku. So how can you do half a ruku and half a substitution? What is it you're actually doing? You're doing ima with the head. It's all you're doing. And you can't do sajda in midair anyway. So when people do this for ruku, I don't know if you can see me. I'm assuming you can see me. So when people are like this and they say, Allahu Akbar, they do this for ruku. Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Sami Allahu liman hamida, Allahu Akbar. Now, what are you doing here? Right? What is this? And they say, well, I'm doing sajda. Well, how are you doing sajda? Your face isn't on the ground. So if you've now substituted both ruku and sajda, then you have to go with the substitute. It's like, for example, you can't use water and you're trying to use tayammum. So you say, oh, you know what? I want to use a little bit of water. I feel a bit bad. So I'm going to make some mud paste and I'm going to put this mud paste on. You're either going to do tayammum or you're going to do wet ablution. You cannot do a mixture of wet ablution and dry ablution. It just doesn't work. If you've been excused to make dry ablution, then do dry ablution. So you can't say, oh, you know, in wet ablution, I also wipe my head, right? In wet ablution, I also wipe my head and I wipe my feet, right? I wash my feet. So I'm going to do the same with dry ablution. You can't. In dry ablution, you have to stick to what's farad in dry ablution. In wet ablution, you stick to what's farad in wet ablution. You can't mix the methodologies. Like, for example, when a person is praying Ṣalāh, he can't mix ruku and bring it into his sitting down prayer thinking, oh, well, that's ruku. Because, okay, if you're going to do that, then what's your sajda? And if you say, well, my sajda's in midair, so when did you ever do sajdas in midair? If you're saying I can do ruku. So this is, you stay stationary, your back is straight, you have chairs which have an increased surface area. I mentioned this increased surface area, the ones which have a kind of a, you know, like this all the way around the bottom of the seat. So you spread your weight so it doesn't damage the carpet. You have a straight backed seat. This is only if we say pray in a chair. Like I said, my position is you do not pray in a chair. But, you know, if somebody was to twist my arm around my back, the chance would be a fine one. But if they did, so like the big guy, 6 foot something, twisted my arm behind my back and said, no, Mufti, you have to tell us how to pray in a chair, then this is how I would say it. You get a chair which has a structure such without the legs, so that it spreads your weight. That's number one. Number two is that it's straight backed. It's not bent, it's straight, so that all the stuff is complete. Number three is you put the chairs completely away from people without chairs. All right. Number four, if you can stand for ruku and you can stand, but you can't make sajda, then you don't stand and you don't stand for ruku. You stay seated. When you stay seated, you sit in a tashahhud position. So the best tashahhud position you can get now is your legs are down and your hands are on your thighs close to your knees. For ruku, you move your head there about, what should we say, about 45 degrees. Okay. And for a sajda, you do 90 degrees. It's not just your eyes, it's your head moves. 45 degrees, 90 degrees, right? And the rest stays the same. None of this, none of this, none of these hands out, whatever, none of this. If you've made yourself mahroom of sajda, then tough. You cannot, you know, that's your loss. And again, I reiterate, a person who can make sajda and doesn't, his salah is not accepted. His salah is not accepted. The only excuse that was given in the kitabs is a person who, when he goes into sajda, urine comes out of him. All right, that was his only reason, that urine comes out of him. So that was a reason given for that person. Okay, I wanted to make a point about nafal salah. You know, many of us, what we'll do is we'll pray nafal salah after tarawih. I wanted to share some text with you. Listen to this. This is in Imam Kasani's kitab, Badaya Sanai. Okay, it mentions that wal-asl, what are my glasses? That's better. وَالْأَصْلِ فِي جَوَازِ النَّفْلِ قَائِدًا مَعَ الْقُدْرَةِ عَلَى الْقِيَامِ مَا رُوِيَ عَنْ عَائِشَةَ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهَا. So the basis for permitting supererogatory prayer in a seated position, even though you have capacity to stand, because you cannot pray seated, as I've just mentioned to you, if you can stand and make sajda. You cannot. And remember, standing and bowing is only a precursor for prostration. So the principle of permitting supererogatory prayers in a seated position with the ability to stand is what has been narrated from Aisha radiallahu anha, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kana yusalli qa'idan. The Prophet alayhi salam used to pray seated. Okay, pray seated. This was when he prayed supererogatory prayers, because the Prophet alayhi salam used to pray all night. You know, not like me and you. Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, Allahu akbar. You know, that's it. 3 seconds surah and we're down and we're already feeling the pain. The Prophet ﷺ used to pray all night. And when you pray all night, especially as he was aging, don't forget, in Medina, the last 10 years of his life, that was when he's obviously the eldest, you know, in age. And he put some weight on when he aged, alayhi salatu wasalam. So therefore, this is his most, physically tiring period in his life. Hence the reason he sat, not because he was lazy. And remember, he would recite Surah Baqarah in first rakah, Surah Al Imran in the second rakah. Each 2 rakats would take like 3 hours or something, 2-3 hours. So you're gonna tire. But what did he do? What he would do is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is kana yusalli qa'idan fa idha arada an yarka'a. When he intended to make ruku, qama, he stood up. Faqara'a ayatin, he recited the last few ayats of whatever he was going to do. Thumma raka'a wa sajada. Then he made ruku and then he made sajda. Thumma ada ila al-qu'ud. Then he stayed seated again. He did not go to ruku from a seated position, because you cannot go into ruku from a seated position. He did not go into sajda from a seated position, because as we've reiterated over the last half an hour, you cannot go into sajda from a seated position. You can only go into sajda from a seated position. Inna lillah. You can only go into a sajda from a standing position. So even though the Prophet ﷺ would say Allahu Akbar, and he would now recite Surah Thana, Surah Al-Fatiha, Ta'awuz, Tasmiyah, in the right order, of course, and then he would recite a long surah for maybe an hour. And when he knew he was getting to the end of this surah or whatever he was reciting, I'm just saying this, okay, he would now stand up, recite the last few ayats, stood up, and then Allahu Akbar, go into ruku, and then Samiyallah, Allahu Akbar, go into sajda, and then instead of saying Allahu Akbar after the second sajda and standing all the way back up again, he would say Allahu Akbar and he would sit back down again, and he would start his second rakah. And when he would do his second rakah for another hour before he was going to go into ruku and sajda, he would stand up again, recite the last few ayats before, and then Allahu Akbar, go into ruku. So he did not become mahroom of ruku and sajda. The way we pray nafal now is very, very different than this. Next one. فصل في صلاة النفل جالسا وفي صلاة على الدابة وصلاة الماشي. Okay. ويجوز النفل إنما أبر به ليشمل سنن مؤكدة وغير معرفة الصلاة قائدا مع القدرة القيام، وقال حكى في إجماع العلماء وعلى غير المعتمد يقال لسنة الفجر لما قيل بوجوبه. I don't know if this adds anything to it. So basically it says here وكان يجلس في عامة صلاته بالليل. Here we go. Wait a minute, here we go. لأن الصح جواز قائدا من غير عذر فلا يستثنى من جواز النفل جالسا بلا عذر شيء على صحيح، لأنه صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يصلي بعد الوتر. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام used to sit after witr قائدا, sat down to pray salah. وكان يجلس في عامة صلاته بالليل. He would, as I have already mentioned to you, for most of his night prayers, his qiyamul layl, he would stay in a seated position. Why? تخفيفا, in order not to burden himself, because it was a long night. وفي رواية عن Aisha, this is probably the same riwayah, and there is a narration from Aisha رضي عنها, فلما أراد أن يركع, when he intended to make ruku, قام, he stood up. فقرأ آيات, he would recite some verses. ثم ركع, then he would make ruku. وسجد, then he would make sajda. وعاد إلى القعود, and then he would return to sitting. وقال في المعراج الدراية والمستحب في كل الطوي بس يصلي قائدا. It's mustahab, you mentioned in Mi'raj al-Diraya. That's not necessarily the muftabi position, so don't get carried away. موافقة للسنة ولو لم يقرأ حين استوى قائما وركع وسجد أجزاء أو لم يستوي قائما وركع لا يجزي لأنه لا يكون ركوعا قائما. What does that say here? ولم يقرأ حين استوى قائما وركع وسجد أجزاءه ولو لم يستوي قائما وركع لا يجزئه. If he did not stand and he made ruku, then it would not be sufficient for him. لأنه لا يكون, because this is not ruku قائما ولا ركوعا قائدا كما في التجليس ولكن له أي المتنفل جالسا نصف أجر القائم. However, the person who prays nafal seated, he gets half the reward of a standing person. So why would you go for half the reward? Kyun? لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, because of the statement of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, من صلى قائما فهو أفضل. The person who prays standing is superior. ومن صلى قائدا, and as for the person who prays seated, obviously this is only for the sunnah غير مؤكدة. The person who prays seated, فله نصف أجر القائم, he gets half the reward of the standing person. ومن صلى نائما, and that person who prays, I don't think this means asleep, prays lying down, فله نصف أجر القائد. هذا في حقه القادر العاجز. This is obviously a person who is هذا في حق القادر. This is with regards to a person who is able. As for a person who is unable, does he get a reduction in his reward? He's unable. Min uzrin, due to some reason, fasalatu bil ima, then his salah is superior with indication of the law, better min salat al qa'im, than a person who is standing and making ruku and making sajda, li'annahu jahdu nafli, sorry, I just misread that. لأنه جهد المقل والإجماع منعقد على أن صلاة القائد بعذر مساوية لصلاة القائم في الأجر كذا في الدراع. قلت بل هو أرقى منه لأنه أيضا جهد المقل. I think that says. Okay, my eyes are going. I'm getting late. ونية المرء خير من عمله. And that brings us to that point.